It's the South Carolina Goodlife Podcast.
Welcome, Realtors. Welcome to the Goodlife Podcast. I'm your General Counsel, Byron King. Today, we'll be talking to some housing investigators from South Carolina Human Affairs Commission. We've got two guests today, Don Frierson to my right and Alyssa Barker, also a housing investigator, also to my right. And as usual, Mike Christ is handling the videography. And so thank you for joining us today. I appreciate your time today. And Don, we'll start with you. Can you tell a little bit about yourself and your job, and then Alyssa?
Well, my name is Don Frierson. I was involved with the Fair Housing Division when it came online in 1989 at the South Carolina Human Affairs Commission. I initially worked in intake, traveled all over the state collecting fair housing complaints, left the agency, came back as an investigator. And it's interesting we're here today because I think this is the 54th anniversary of the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King, and the Fair Housing Act was passed in recognition of the work he did, trying to get what was known as open housing legislation passed during his lifetime. And a lot of people don't know that it was his brother, A.D. King, who really was the force behind the Fair Housing Act. So it's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you very much. Alyssa?
Yeah, I actually started my career in affordable housing, property management, and doing compliance there, and just kind of found a love of housing. So I have been investigating housing discrimination complaints for about 5 years now with the Human Affairs Commission, and it's been wonderful to bring those two worlds together.
Super. Welcome also. So Realtors, as you know, you're under the Realtor Code of Ethics for Fair Housing Article 10, and additionally your state licensing law. You're required to comply with fair housing laws. And then the marketplace also will weed you out if you don't comply with fair housing. But our guests today are from the state government, South Carolina Human Affairs Commission. And so what their roles as housing investigators. So Alyssa, I'll let you go first this time. Can you kind of tell us what a housing investigator, what is your role and what do you do?
Yeah, so our role is to enforce the South Carolina Fair Housing Law. The South Carolina Fair Housing Law is equivalent to the Federal Fair Housing Act. So when we get complaints that come in, we investigate them. We look into them, talk to all the parties, obtain evidence that might be relevant, and from there the agency issues a determination as to whether there has been a fair housing violation. And if there has been one, in our opinion, then we begin the process of litigation on behalf of the state.
Super. And then, Don, anything you'd like to add to Alyssa's description?
Sure. We investigate cases based on what's known as the 7 protected classes: race, sex, national origin, religion, disability, familial status, and color. And we do not represent either party, the complainant or the respondent being the person who has the complaint filed against them. A lot of times we get complainants thinking that we're the lawyers, but we're not. And as Alyssa will tell you, most of the complaints we get involve disability.
Right, I've heard that too. So, and Don, so if a member of the public feels like they had some discrimination in rental housing or even buying a house, who can file a complaint, and what's kind of the process of filing the complaint?
Well, anybody can file a complaint. I just listed the 7 protected classes, which includes everybody, because everybody is of some race, sex. People have children, people of various religions. So if you feel you're being discriminated against, you call the commission, we'll send you a form to fill out. Once that form is filled out, our intake unit will draft a complaint, send it back to you to be notarized. Once it's notarized, it'll go to an investigator. Not notarized, I'm sorry, we don't notarize complaints in fair housing. We do in employment, but not in fair housing. Once we receive that complaint, it's assigned to an investigator. The investigator has 100 days to investigate the case. Of course, all cases, because of their complexity, don't end in 100 days. So if it doesn't end in 100 days, we have to send both parties a letter stating that the case is still open. And based on that, we can find cause, no cause, or we can conciliate. And Alyssa, you want to talk to them about those 3 findings?
Yeah, so the types of outcomes could be a no-cause determination. That just means that we did not find that there was sufficient evidence for us to move forward with the lawsuit. Now, because as Mr. Frierson mentioned, we don't represent any parties, the person who brought the complaint could file their own lawsuit. They would still have that right. But our investigation would be closed and we would no longer be a part of it. The other outcome is conciliation. It's essentially kind of like a settlement process. The investigator almost serves as a mediator during the course of the investigation and is a neutral party to pass along offers. If the parties do agree on the terms, then we would sign a legally binding conciliation agreement that would give a little bit of enforcement right to the commission to enforce those terms, just in case there is a breach on any side. The alternative is the cause determination, meaning we did find sufficient evidence of discrimination. And in that case, we would move forward with either filing in circuit court or a panel of our commissioners would hear it. Either way, the panel hearing does kind of go similarly to a court hearing. There's still depositions. It's still a legal process either way. It just tends to go a little faster. You're an attorney. I'm sure you know how long the legal system can take and how much that process can be. And of course, once we find cause, there's still additional efforts to try to settle the case before it gets heard in court.
Super. So it sounds like the way you guys are describing it, the Human Affairs is kind of a team. So you're kind of the fact finders. You'll get the complaint, and your job is kind of develop the report. And then your lawyer, I guess your side of the team, the legal side of the team, will kind of work out either a settlement or even go to court to find some disciplines, that kind of thing.
Well, the investigator is charged with trying to conciliate the complaint, as is required by HUD. In the cases that we can't conciliate, then we issue a cause or no cause determination. And if it's a cause situation and we prevail in court, then there are civil penalties for the respondent on top of everything else that we might find.
That makes sense. And when you say conciliate, you're talking about, so you gather the facts and then you're talking to the accused, for lack of a better, what's the terminology for somebody when you're talking to a real estate licensee where somebody says, you call them
we generally just refer to them as the complainant, the charging party, and the respondents. We don't want to use any loaded language or anything like that. They're just the responding parties. And
that's the term we use for our realtor ethics also. So when you talk to, say, the respondent real estate agent and say there's a claim for a disability, some sort of disability discrimination in rental housing or buying a home, what are some factors? Do you guys weigh in how cooperative they are, or what are some factors that you take into account when you're trying? And when you say conciliate, you're trying to work out a settlement. Is that kind of what we're talking about?
We're basically trying to bring the parties together to reach a mutual understanding, so to speak. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. We don't weigh into whether somebody's hostile or, that's only the facts. The other thing about conciliations are they're separate from the investigation. So say if Alyssa has a case and it goes to court, all her conciliation efforts would not be a part of that particular file. So typically we'll ask the complainant, what is it that you are seeking? Sometimes people say, I want $1 million. No, seriously, and then we have to tell the respondent they want $1 million. Of course, a lot of cases they don't get $1 million. I can't remember a case where they actually got $1 million, but we can't really tell them what they should be asking for. But we try to, I don't even want to say steer, but how would you?
I would say we can't give any sort of advice.
Right.
Obviously, we're not even attorneys.
Mm-hmm.
Being neutral parties, we don't give any advice, but we can kind of explain what the process is and what we've seen in the past. Our website has some examples of previous conciliation agreements, redacted obviously, but people can kind of see what is typical for a settlement agreement. If we have not issued a determination of cause yet, then this is a no-fault agreement. So that kind of weighs into it as well, as to what the respondents might agree to. But yeah, that's something I usually steer people to, is look online and see, what our typical agreements look like. what they include, and if you can find something similar to what what you've been going through, that might help kind of guide them.
And the reason you can find them on the internet is because conciliations are public documents.
That makes sense. That makes sense because we use something similar in the ethics mediation, and just like you said, if it goes to court, that's obviously confidential. This kind of the settlement talks if they fail or private. So one of the examples we hear a lot about rental housing and disability discrimination. So say a tenant or prospective tenant, they're in a wheelchair and they want to get a parking space up close to the apartment building, or they want a ramp. Say there's some stairs. What are some things that you would talk to if you were talking to and the property just manager says no to the prospective tenant, and then they file a complaint with you all, and you're talking to the real estate agent, the property manager. What are some things that you would discuss with disabilities about trying to get a parking spot close to the apartment or building a ramp for the stairs? Well,
we explain the law to them. Now, it's important to note if it's a 504 situation, 504 being the Rehabilitation Act,
yes,
then they're receiving government money, so they have to grant the accommodation out of reasonable modification. If it's not a 504 and it's a reasonable modification, say you want to widen the walls or something in your house or something that you're renting, you can do that, but you have to put the house back together again the way it was when you got it. If it's a 504 Rehabilitation Act situation, then you don't have to do that. What was the other part of the question?
So I was saying, like, say a prospective tenant, maybe they want a parking spot close to the, say there's a big parking lot, and they're saying, hey, I want a handicapped spot right in front of my apartment, and then you covered the stuff about the ramp, or that was a good point about widening doors or lowering countertops. So it sounds like part of the conciliation, you would talk to the property manager and try to find a way to get to allow the tenant to put in the ramp or maybe move the parking. Kind of common sense stuff is what I'm hearing from you. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think that's another time where our previous experiences in the fair housing world can come into play, where obviously something like that, it's going to depend on the physical elements of the property and if that's even an option. So that's an opportunity for us to pull on our knowledge or our coworkers and what we've seen before. If what the complainant is specifically asking for is not possible, then that gives us an opportunity to say, well, we have seen other properties do X or Y. Is that something you guys can do, and see if that works for everyone?
That sounds good.
Now I might add, in some cases I've had, and I'm pretty sure Alyssa has had, we've tried to conciliate. And I'm thinking in particular of one case, they told this lady she would have to get rid of her dog because it's a pit bull. And of course, under fair housing law, it's not breed specific, it's an emotional support animal. And the respondent was just doing everything wrong. And I tried to explain to them, well, listen, this is wrong, you can't do this, you can't do that, and they wanted to argue, so I just wrote it up, cause, even though we tried to explain the law to them, because we aren't out to get anybody, to be honest with you.
I will, circling back to one of your questions about whether willingness to cooperate plays a role. Certainly not necessarily during conciliation. That's more of us kind of passing things along. But I have had a case go to court where civil penalties sought were a lot higher because the respondent, it was my case, so they purposely lied about having documentation that then came out during the discovery process. They were very difficult for me to deal with. They wouldn't respond to calls and stuff. So that did come into play later on in the legal process, but it doesn't necessarily weigh in on the conciliation or the determination itself, but it could play a role in civil penalties just to kind of get people to understand that this is the law and it is serious, Yeah,
that's a good point. Very good. And kind of, you talked about service animals and emotional support animals. That's become a hot topic with real estate agents in recent years. I kind of throw that question out to either of you if you would like to talk about emotional support animals and or service animals.
We could talk about those for days, I
think.
On yeah. Have you guys seen a lot of that, of one in particular, a lot of requests? How does that work for you guys as realtors?
Right. So the typical emotional, and it's usually service animals pretty clear cut. You got a seeing eye dog or a seeing eye miniature
Dog
horse.
does something.
Yes, sir. Exactly. So ours, just like everything the airlines have been dealing with, the emotional support animals, the comfort animals, because and the two viewpoints are these animals are very useful. They allow people with disability to function in society. Maybe it's a service member that's been over in combat and they have PTSD. Or some people view them as kind of a quote unquote scheme to get around the no pet policy. So usually for us, it's usually rentals is usually the issue. So a tenant will come in and they'll have a pet, and then when they say there's no pet or there's a pet rent, then all of a sudden they're like, oh, this is an emotional support animal. So one thing the realtors love to hear kind of cases that you guys have seen. What are some cases with animals that you guys recall off the top of your head? I'm putting you on the spot.
So many. One of the problems with emotional support animals is you can go online and get just about anything you want to. HUD has promulgated a new set of policies, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Alyssa, it says that you have to have some type of temporal relationship with your healthcare provider.
Yes,
I
but
mean,
it's a very broad,
Yeah.
open-ended kind of guidance on that.
Yeah. Now, what I have seen, I've actually seen a person who actually forged a doctor's signature so he could have an emotional support animal.
That's not good.
And I don't know if you went with me on that or not, but found out the guy was breeding dogs. And another one, this lady said she needed an emotional support animal. She had 7 dogs. And if you have 7 dogs and you're complaining and you're asking for a reasonable accommodation because of an emotional support animal, each one of those dogs has to perform a specific task. The doctor has to tell us in his doctor's note, dog 1 does this, dog 2 does this, dog 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Of course, she couldn't do that because the doctors couldn't even agree that she even needed an emotional support animal. So that went out of the way. But I think with emotional support animals, you can ask the person for a doctor's statement. Now, the doctor's statement is not supposed to have the disability of the person on the statement. But the realtor or the person who's managing the complex can ask for that type of medical documentation.
I think recently the South Carolina Fair Housing Law was amended in the last year or two to include that you can ask for reliable documentation that the person is disabled, more of a yes or no without details, and whether the person needs that animal to alleviate a symptom of the disability or assist with the disability in some way. So our law specifically says those things now under the disability portion of the South Carolina Fair Housing Law. I know we keep saying doctor, you'll hear us say doctor a lot, but it could be any medical professional.
Or a caregiver.
Yeah, a caregiver. We see mostly, I would say, therapists and social workers writing letters. But yeah, we don't like those websites either. But unfortunately, it's kind of difficult to get around these days. I know that there are websites that contract with therapists now. So that has kind of muddied the waters a little bit as well, because they are technically seeing a therapist or someone, a professional that is then writing the letter. So I don't have an official answer on how that's going to work out. I don't know that there's been case law looking at that specifically, but that is something that we look at as well, as make sure that this is not printed certificate online.
Yeah, HUD has promulgated a guidance on that. When did the last guidance come out?
2020.
2020, yeah. And I think that's pretty easy to get. I mean, if you want, we can send you a copy. If you follow that guidance, I think you'll be pretty much on track.
And while I'm looking at this, what is your website? If the realtors that are watching this video, if they want to go on their computer and look at your website, what's the best address? Is there a generic address? I'm putting you on the spot.
I think it's www.schac.sc.gov. That's a lot of letters that sound the same. So you might just want to Google South Carolina Human Affairs Commission.
It'll be the first one to come up.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah.
And we talked about, and like I said, realtors love examples. So we talked about disabilities, ramps, parking, widening doors, and service animals and emotional support animals. What are some other fair housing violations that you can think of off the top of your head?
I had a case we were trying to settle. It's an old case. Guy wanted to buy a house. Went to the real estate agent. Real estate agent says, well, you might not want to live here. You might want to live somewhere else. And I said, no, I want to live here. Well, let me send you this. And then the real estate agent starts talking, says something to the effect that, well, I know I'm not supposed to say this, but this area over here is pretty dangerous. And I'm not saying I don't like black people. My husband works with black people in all this. And so the guy filed a complaint. So you have to be real careful about what you say to a prospective buyer. And I think also realtors have to explain the buying process. One of the first cases I had, a woman filed a complaint because she had been pre-qualified, but she wasn't pre-approved. She didn't know the difference between the two. She thought because she was pre-qualified, she should have been able to buy a house. But she was not pre-approved, which are two different things. And the real estate agent didn't spell it out to her, which caused her to file a complaint.
That makes sense. Yeah, education is definitely a component of that. And then treating, even the Realtor Code of Ethics is based on the golden rule, treat other people like you'd want to be treated. So
if you do that, you'll be okay.
Yeah, I can actually think of one where one of my cases against an HOA. An HOA was along the coastline, and there were a lot of alligators in the area. And so the board members were concerned about them renting this house to children. So they were basically going out there and telling anyone under 16 that was with their family that they couldn't have minors in the household. And in that case, the real estate agents that had been representing our charging party served as witnesses to the discrimination. They had actually told the HOA, you can't do this, and tried to kind of stand up for their clients. So they were able to recognize it, which is huge, and be witnesses in the complaint. And that, I don't know if I can say how much that settled for, but that was a great settlement for them because they had years of not being able to rent this property for a long time. So in that case, the real estate agent was doing a fantastic job, and that's something that I think that all of you guys can be on the lookout for and help your clients in that way if you see it on the other side.
Yeah, real estate agents can file complaints too. If their client has been discriminated against, they can file.
yeah, it's outstanding. The other thing that you both made me think of, do you take anonymous complaints, or does somebody have to put their name on a complaint?
Someone has to put their name on it, unfortunately.
We're the same. They can, we have limited anonymous ability to complain, but if it goes to hearing, obviously, and most times you can figure out who's complaining against you from the facts.
Yeah. I don't know what extent this involves realtors, but we get a lot of complaints against homeowner associations.
Yeah, the HOAs we get a lot of calls too. What are some that come off, like on the top of your head, about HOAs?
Disability. I had a case about 2 years ago. This guy needed a van. I call it a van. Actually, it was an RV, right?
Yes.
And the purpose of it was because he was disabled and he had to go to the bathroom a lot. And so this van had a bathroom in it. HOA rule said you couldn't park an RV in the driveway. You know, we went round and they finally settled, but it took some hard negotiations because I was just ready to write it up, to be honest with you, because it was a clear violation. And HOA, they have rules. It's got to look like this. It's got to, with brush, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think aesthetics end up being a big deal when it comes to reasonable accommodations and modifications for disabled individuals.
Yep.
I think one thing we see a good bit in HOAs and condo associations also has been familial status. We see a lot of, even if it's not what the initial complaint is on, I tend to notice them when looking through rules and regulations that there are a lot of curfews for minor children, which would be a violation of familial status. The specific rules about toys, just general rules targeting children. So that's something that we see a good bit. And then on the condo associations, we've seen some more occupancy policy rules coming up lately. Don, you want to talk about occupancy policy, HUD memo?
A Keating memo came out, this was years ago when I got started in fair housing, which basically stated that, what is it,
Two heartbeats per bedroom was like
Right.
a general guideline.
Yeah, but the memo also says you have to consider living space. So if you got, give me an example. Let's see.
So
you just had
yeah,
one
one that I've had a ton. One that comes to mind was a 1-bedroom, very modern place. So it was very open, big bedroom. It was a 1-bedroom, and it was a couple, and the wife was pregnant. And because they were about to be 3 instead of 2, the property was terminating their lease and making them move. Even though, I mean, I went in and looked at it and measured it, and I think that closet in the master bedroom was bigger than my current bedroom. So reasonably, there was plenty of space, especially for an infant that's probably going to be by your side all the time. So coming into that reasonableness of size, the age of the child, the layout of the property is something that has to be considered, not just 2 heartbeats per bedroom.
Right.
Because I have so many people say it's state law or it's federal law, and that is not necessarily the case. There are some rules. Some places have different guidelines and stuff, different cities and townships. But that's not an overall federal rule. That's not what that HUD memo was.
I had a lady who had 13 children. True story. And she couldn't find a place to live. And every time she would go to rent a house, they would turn her down. And she thought it's because of familiar status. It wasn't familiar status. She just had too many children for the house that she was trying to rent. So, and I think she filed about 2 or 3 complaints. Of course, we dismissed them all, but.
But one thing to note with that is that, having multiple children, possibly of different genders, we've had people make comments to us that, well, it's a boy and a girl, so they can't share a bedroom. And that's not really anybody's place but the parents to decide who's going to sleep where, who's going to share what room or sleep on the couch. There's no law against sleeping on the couch, So it's not the real estate agent or the manager, whoever's place to decide how they're going to share those rooms. But we have heard those comments before.
I actually had a case like that years ago.
Yeah, those are fantastic examples. And when you're working a case, how long do these cases from start to finish usually take, just ballpark?
It depends on the complexity of them. We try to do them within 100 days, but sometimes the complexity of the case calls for us to go over the 100 days. Sometimes the respondents just don't want to respond, and that just drags it out, and you ask for specific information. They don't want to send it. That drags it out, and then when they do send it, they send you 10 boxes of information, which has nothing to do, but you have to go through it. So it all depends.
Yeah, we do go through a lot. It's a good thing that I enjoy reading, because I have read through so many master deeds at this point that I can probably write them.
She just had one, I think, where they sent you about a box load
I
of
had
stuff.
3 giant boxes in my office, so, and I went through all of it.
Yeah, she's good. I would have sent them back. No, I wouldn't.
Yeah, that's good information. So another thing comes up, like real estate, they try to do the right thing by and large. And so if something comes up that they've never experienced before, are you able to talk to people proactively? Like, could a real estate agent contact South Carolina Human Affairs and try to get some guidance on, hey, these are some ways you might be able to handle the situation?
We can tell them what the law is. We can't tell them what to do.
Okay.
Yeah.
We can tell them what the law is.
But we're always happy to take those calls.
Okay.
Obviously, we're not attorneys giving legal advice, but this is what we do day in and out. So we're happy to talk to people and give examples, one-on-one, or explain what the law is.
Actually, I think real estate agents in South Carolina do a pretty good job observing the law. But you never know, because we were talking earlier before we taped this broadcast about the situation in Long Island, where they found rampant discrimination. And sometimes I think to myself, well, wow, if they did a study like that in South Carolina, what would they find? The other interesting thing is, this is why you have to be on your P's and Q's, because you don't know who you're talking to. We actually had we went out to Texas, these testing, yeah. They would literally call a property and say, I'm disabled, I got a 10-pound pit bull, a 50, whatever, pit bull. He's the motion support animal. And I want to rent an apartment. The apartment manager would say, well, pit bulls are a dangerous breed, so you can't rent from us. They filed, and they were testing, that's what they were doing. They filed about, how many cases you would imagine? A lot of them.
Yeah.
And won every last one of them.
Yeah, because they were recording it. One of the reasons that they did it here pretty easily is, at least as of this recording, it's a one-party recording state. So they did not have to tell the person on the other end that they were recording this phone call. And I think that holds true for a lot of cases I've seen. I've gotten a lot of recordings taken from somebody's cell phone or their purse or whatever, where they recognized something was going on and they started recording their interactions with the person. So you're always on camera. It's 2022. Because, you're always being recorded.
Because, sometimes a white person might want to live on the black side of town and, you don't want to live over here. Or vice versa, the houses are too expensive. I mean, you don't know who you're talking to. And the big thing now is appraisals. That's the really big thing in housing.
I read somewhere the Biden administration, I just know a little bit about it. It sounds like that's something you guys are up to speed on. What are some things that you've read about this, the appraisal and the fair housing aspect of appraising?
What happens is, try to think of an example, and this actually happened. I want to sell my house, and Alyssa wants to buy it. And me being the person selling the house because I'm black, if Alyssa knows that, then the price is going to go down. So and this actually happens, so what a lot of black people will do, any traces of a black person living in the house, they'll just get rid of. Pictures, everything, they'll just get rid of. And they've done this in appraisals too, because what they do is, somebody will come out of an appraisal house and the appraisal will come in low. So the couple will get one of their white friends to represent that they own the house, and they'll take anything in the house that you can detect a black person may have been living there, African art, photos, and the house come in at a higher bid. And so with appraisals and with selling, I have not seen this in selling appraisals here in South Carolina, but this is what the concern is. A lot of people will actually, they'll do that. I had a lady told me that, and it was strange to me at the time. That's the first time I ever heard. This was like 8 years ago.
And as you mentioned, appraisal has been kind of a focus of this administration. So HUD has done some recent webinars and put together some things that can be found on the HUD Exchange website. If you want to go look those up, they're available to watch for free. They have some great videos on there about appraisals and algorithm bias in lending and stuff as well. That would be fantastic if you have a lunch hour to sit down and watch it. It's on the HUD Exchange website.
Fantastic. That's great information. And so we've talked about, you've given some great examples. We've talked about the investigation can conclude with a kind of settlement or even going to court and having a judge hand down a decision. Any suggestions how, and you guys may have already covered some of this, how real estate agents can help to avoid fair housing laws? I know you mentioned, hey, there's testers out there, so always be on mind your manners, treat everybody the same. Any other kind of helpful hints for real estate agents to try to avoid fair housing violations?
Don't give advice when none is asked for. And sometimes when it's asked for, still don't give it. Well, is there a lot of crime over in this area? Go down to the police department and ask them. What about the schools in this area? Well, go to the Department of Education and ask them. Because those are questions a lot of times that people will think you're trying to steer them. So you want to stay away from questions like that. Anything they want to know about the neighborhood, tell them where they go can go to get the information. Don't volunteer the information. And make sure you explain what the buying process is. I've seen situations where a person will submit a contract, another contract comes in, right on top of each other. Then the person who didn't get the house think they were being discriminated against because they got their contract in on time, or so they thought. So I guess you always want to clock in those contracts when they come through.
Certainly, I'm sure, especially as we were talking before we started recording, the way things are going now with people coming in over asking price. I know there's been an uptick in people writing personal letters to try to get their bid to win. So that's something to keep an eye out for as the real estate agent to make sure that everybody's being treated the same, and that those biases are not playing into the final decision of what contract to choose if you were representing the buyer.
Right, you want to represent your client, but you don't want to give any appearance of steering or any unfavorable treatment. Because after all, money is all green.
Well put. Yeah, thank you for your time today. Excellent information, excellent examples, excellent explanation of the process and how realtors can avoid getting into fair housing trouble. I really appreciate your time today.
Thank you.
Look forward to talking to you about fair housing in the future. Thanks.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure.
For past and future episodes, check out the Good Life Podcast at goodlife.screaltors.org. Thanks for tuning in.